Good morning. Appreciate everyone's patience. Welcome back. Had a great day yesterday. We'd like to welcome everybody who's watching us on C-SPAN, especially our Heritage Action Sentinels all across the country. Thank you for what you're doing. We had nearly 12,000 online viewers yesterday. Grateful for everyone who tuned in there. And the hashtag for those on social media, hashtag Op4All, was, I'm told, the #1 political hashtag in the nation yesterday, whatever that means. The theme for this summit and the book that we've released this week is Opportunity for All, Favoritism to None. Our goal is to shift the policy conversation, to advance ideas that ease the burdens on working families and create new opportunities for all Americans. Our objective at Heritage Action is not just to advance the right policies, though. It is to see results. It's to build an America where freedom, opportunity, prosperity, and civil society flourish. Hence the second part of our theme, favoritism to none, which speaks to the pernicious role interest groups play in our politics in Washington, D.C. There's been much talk of late about the need for conservatives to move beyond the intramural disputes that have defined the last several years in Washington. As a daily participant in those fights on the right, Heritage Action has a different view. Well-intentioned debate amongst conservatives about who we are and what we ought to be doing is not something to be feared. Indeed, it's mainly liberals on college campuses who are the ones who are too tender to deal with the pernicious effects of dissenting viewpoints. Rather than a distraction, grappling with the tensions internal to the center-right in this nation is a necessary precondition to building an opportunity agenda. It is necessary for it forces our nation's allegedly conservative party to address the core challenges which have prevented it from governing successfully in recent years. The fact is that both of our nation's political parties have founding flaws in their DNA. The left actually has several flaws to contend with. First, as Margaret Thatcher famously said, eventually you run out of other people's money. And we are seeing that across the country as governors confront the challenges of paying for promises made to teachers' unions, other public sector unions, and meeting the cost of the social safety net. Secondly, and unfortunately, in the real world, good intentions do not inevitably lead to good results. We're seeing this with the results of well-intentioned policies that are failing those they are intended to serve, from the 50-year-old war on poverty to the humanitarian crisis on our southern border, which was caused by the president's lawless amnesty. Finally, the left is the party of large 20th century-style institutions. Now, I can understand how the experience at your local DMV might make sense to somebody raised with Harry Ford's concept of choice. You can have any color Ford you want as long as it's black. It makes no sense, however, to somebody who grew up buying music on iTunes. Those of us on the right, however, are not without our flaws to contend with. Primarily, the party of limited government must confront the first challenge taught in college political science courses, the challenge of specific benefits being granted to those who can leverage diffuse costs. This is seen, for example, at Boeing's bank, the Export-Import Bank, up for reauthorization this summer. It's a bank that gives the vast majority of its loans to a few well-connected companies, GE, Boeing, Caterpillar, and the rest go to Solyndra, Russian oligarchs, drug cartels in Latin America, the billionaire in Australia. You get the picture. For the party of limited government to succeed, it must rely on politicians coming to Washington, being given access to the levers of power, and staying true to the principles of limited government upon which they were elected. And they must do that while raising millions of dollars for re-election. The path of least resistance is obvious. Grant a carve-out to somebody with a PAC check. Contemplate an earmark for a bundler. Talk the talk, but don't rock the boat. The biggest roadblock undermining efforts to construct a true reform agenda is the political establishment's preoccupation with tending to the concerns of the well-connected special interests with a strong preference for the status quo. That tendency is the very thing the Tea Party most resents about the Washington status quo, and it's what Tea Party members of Congress are trying to shake up. Think about the governing agenda means to the political establishment today. Think about the first priorities congressional leadership has articulated for this new session: the Keystone XL pipeline, repeal of the medical device tax. Decent pro-business priorities all. But none of them mean much to a working family struggling to get by in the Obama economy. A reform agenda means more to us at Heritage Action. It means rolling back federal overreach in K-12 education and curbing college costs by changing the higher education accreditation system. It means replacing Obamacare with a patient-centered alternative that gives beneficiaries the control they need for our system to be more cost-effective. It means reforming our tax code and ending the carve-outs that play favorites with hardworking Americans' money. It means reasserting Congress's place in the balance of powers by giving it approval authority for high-cost administrative regulations that favor the well-connected. Why aren't more D.C. conservatives rallying around ideas like these? The answer is simple. They upset the status quo that is so comfortable to those on K Street who have the ears of those in power. Reforming higher education, and you infuriate university administrators. End the cozy alliance between the government and the insurance industry, and the lobby stops writing big checks. What purpose does our tax code have if not to incentivize special interests to lobby for a carve-out? It's not enough to fight for opportunity if you're not willing to fight favoritism. And it's not enough to be against favoritism if you don't have a vision of how we can create opportunity. And no elected official has done more to achieve both than our speaker here this morning. Mike Lee embodies that which is right about public service. He disagrees with orthodoxy without being disagreeable. He has a vision for empowering people to soar and to achieve both, and stands up and fights for it. Mike's legislative agenda truly would deliver opportunity for all and favoritism to none. It includes the Higher Education Reform and College Opportunity Act, the Energy Freedom and Economic Prosperity Act, the National Right to Work Act, the Transportation Empowerment Act, the RAINS Act, the list goes on and on. Mike has been in the foxhole with conservatives at every turn in the past several years, and conservatives will stand with him every day of the week in the years to come. There's no one better positioned to lay out the outlines of a real opportunity agenda that doesn't pick favorites. I'm honored to introduce Senator Mike Lee.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be with you this morning. And thank you, Mike Needham, for everything that you and the others here at Heritage Action do, and for hosting this important event. I appreciate also all of you for coming to participate in this. I'm always delighted to have the opportunity to come to the Heritage Foundation. I'm especially grateful today that it's not raining. I don't know why, but almost every time I speak at the Heritage Foundation, it seems to rain. Now, it's not a big deal. My office is only about a block and a half away from here, but it always creates kind of a mini crisis when it rains the day I'm supposed to speak at Heritage, because I insist on walking over most of the time because, well, I have a Fitbit and I'm now obsessed with getting in more steps, and I don't want to lose those steps by riding in a car. But if we walk over, even with a good umbrella, a strong rain will end up getting us soaking wet. So a long story short, I'm grateful today that it's not raining. I know we've had several new, strong, committed conservatives sworn into the U.S. Senate just in the last few days, and I'm thrilled about that. But I have to admit, I still really miss my friend Jim DeMint. He has been an inspiration to me and continues to be my friend to this day. You know, a few years ago, I started talking to him in pretty lofty terms, and I started encouraging him to one day run for president. And I have to say, this is not exactly what I had in mind. I didn't say, Jim, run for president of the Heritage Foundation, but perhaps that's what he heard. But in truth, I'm glad Jim didn't take my advice. He's done a fantastic job at the helm of the Heritage Foundation over the last couple years. And this policy summit and other events like it are testaments to his leadership, his commitment to a positive vision for America. And he has brought so much to this foundation. And I have to say also, I am very glad that his 2-year ban is now over. What I mean by that is when somebody leaves the Senate, they're barred for 2 years from having any significant input on anything that's going on in the Senate. So for the last 2 years, every time I've seen my friend Jim DeMint, about all I can say to him is, hello, Jim. And he can say, hello. That's a nice tie you have on. And that's where the conversation ends, because almost anything after that is prohibited by law. But I'm glad that's finally over, and I look forward to having more policy discussions with Jim DeMint. After the very historic victory the Republican Party won in November, and the great enthusiasm that has followed in its wake, this summit is, I think, exactly what conservatives need. A time to refocus our minds on the serious challenges facing our country and to share, discuss, and debate our ideas on how we can begin to solve those same problems. There are many pressing issues that deserve our attention and require action by us. So many, in fact, that it can sometimes seem very, very difficult to keep them all straight. But as I see it, there is one issue, one challenge facing the American people today that rises above all the rest in terms of its complexity, in terms of its magnitude, and in terms of the rest of its consequences, the reach of its consequences, how far they extend. Directly or indirectly, it affects nearly every other public policy issue you can think of, and should therefore be placed squarely at the center of our reform agenda. If you haven't figured it out by now, that issue is the family, its increasing importance and its declining stability. And I believe it may be the single defining issue of our time. The family is the first and most important institution of our society. And it also serves as the foundation of American exceptionalism. Regardless of what you think the ideal family structure is, or whether you think there is a single ideal family structure at all, our family is where we learn and the very first and the very deepest lessons that inform our behavior and shape our personalities for the rest of our lives. These things continue well into adulthood, throughout the rest of our lives. As one author put it, the family is the nursery of the next generation. More than just the provider of material protections, the family is the shaper of human character. It's everyone's primary source of human and social capital. Skills and habits like empathy, self-control, and trust facilitate our pursuit of happiness. By teaching us what it means to live with duties and obligations toward others, the family prepares us for citizenship and teaches us how to live as members of our community. The family has always been the linchpin of American life. But today more than ever, the health of the family is indivisible from the destiny of our great nation. This is the result of two trends. First, profound economic and cultural changes over the past several decades have dramatically altered the structure and patterns of family life in America. Economic shifts, starting in the 1970s, sort of transformed the labor market, requiring new skills to get a good job, paying a decent wage. As jobs in manufacturing industries dwindled and the service sector rose to replace them, the economic value of the family and the social and human capital that it provides has dramatically increased. Likewise, extraordinary advances in technology transformed the American workplace, rerouting the pathway to economic security through college or an apprenticeship or a job training program. Suddenly, it wasn't just recent high school graduates who needed access to some kind of post-secondary education. It was also working moms and dads trying to acquire the skills they needed to compete for good jobs in the new economy. Meanwhile, following the cultural shifts of the 1960s, there emerged a new pattern of family formation. Throughout our history, the shape and character of families in America had continually shifted and changed to a degree, mirroring the twists and turns of American life. But there was one feature of family life that had remained constant. Most young adults formed their families in the same sequence. First came love, then came marriage, and you know the rest. Today, however, marriage is often the last step, the final step that parents take when forming a family, and it's increasingly a step that's being foregone altogether. Alongside these changes, there was a second trend, or you might say a non-trend, the absence of a trend, occurring at the same time. As American families approach the new economic challenges with their characteristic boldness and optimism, Washington, D.C. responded with its characteristic lethargy and dysfunction. While America and the world changed around them, lawmakers in Washington from both parties clung to old, outdated policies as if they were security blankets, holding them close and refusing to relinquish them. For all politicians' good intentions, this has not been a victimless offense. Today, too few families are forming with or without children, and too few families are remaining intact. While marriage rates fall and divorce and cohabitation rates remain high, the number of children raised by a single parent has nearly quadrupled in the last 50 years. And far too many of those families that do form and do remain intact find themselves squeezed at every turn by an out-of-touch federal government that often seems blind to their struggles, to the struggles of families. As wages flattened for lower and middle-income workers, goods like health care and education saw rapid inflation, government-driven inflation. As the economy put a premium on knowledge and skills, our outmoded higher education policy only made it harder and more expensive for students, both young and old, to get the education the new economy demanded. As the climb from poverty to the middle class grew ever steeper for fragmented families, welfare policies actually came to penalize low-income Americans for getting jobs, or for getting married, or for getting raises. And as social science continually reconfirms our deepest intuitions about the primacy of family life, Washington has singled out married couples and parents for unfair burdens in the tax code. We have transportation, labor, and housing systems that make it harder for parents to find decent jobs, to get by without two full-time incomes, or make it home in time for dinner. And we have a dysfunctional criminal justice system, one that tends to keep many reformed, nonviolent offenders languishing behind bars while their sons are stuck seeking father figures in the streets for years and years at a time. I could go on, and I know that the scholars in this room could go on as well. But the point is that these are not stresses put on the family by the free market. No, nor are these stresses put on the family by globalization or by income inequality or even by corrosive trends in popular culture. No, these trends are the product of sclerotic government policies that are imposed on the American people by politicians. Politicians in Washington, D.C., who respond to change by doubling down on status quo policies that we know already don't work. This is not how a government of, by, and for the people is supposed to work. It's not how that kind of government is supposed to conduct itself. Our economy and society are constantly changing. The government's job is not to micromanage or resist those changes, but to remove any barriers facing the American people as they adapt to them. As Lincoln so wisely counseled, the leading object of government should be to lift artificial weights from all shoulders and clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, especially for working moms and dads who the status quo is so consistently leaving behind. Study after study shows us that a strong family is not just one of the major institutions through which people pursue happiness. It is the one institution upon which all others depend. Economists from Harvard and Cal Berkeley recently published a report finding that growing up with two married parents is not just one factor among many affecting a child's economic future. It is the strongest and the most reliable predictor of upward mobility. More than the racial or economic composition of a child's neighborhood, more than school quality, and more than income inequality, family structure is the most powerful indicator of a child's ability to climb the income ladder as an adult. And what's true for the children of married parents applies also to their friends and their neighbors too. The greatest contribution of this particular study is that it shows that low-income kids are more likely to succeed, whether their own parents were married or not, so long as they grew up in a community with lots of married two-parent families. In other words, strong families make strong communities. My home state of Utah is a testament to how the family connects us to and prepares us to succeed in the networks of opportunity that exist all around us in American society. Across the state, we have a growing, prosperous economy with some of the highest rates of upward mobility in the entire country, in fact, in the entire world. We have smart, efficient government operating alongside what is a very active and faithful voluntary civil society. And we have what may be the most successful private welfare system in the world. But none of this would be possible without strong families. None of it. Not coincidentally, Utah also has the highest percentage of married parent households in the country. But we don't really need social science data to tell us that strong families bring a stabilizing, supportive force to their communities. We've known it, and we see it all of our lives. This is not to say that the only way to lead a happy, fulfilling life is to grow up and be raised by your married mom and dad. Nor is it to say that single parents are anything but full-hearted heroes who deserve anything less than the admiration, support, and respect of a government that has forgotten them for far too long. There's always going to be a diversity of family types and structures in America, and policymakers should not try to artificially recreate the culture of the 1950s any more than it might try to recreate the economy of the 1950s. We must meet America where she is. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't promote the arrangement that is best for children and adults and for America's very future. For the family is much more than a socializing unit. It's an incubator of human flourishing. It's an incubator of personal and economic success. Now, the data on this is clear. The future of our society ultimately depends on the honest, noble parents across the country trying to make ends meet in a society, economy, and political system that's increasingly rigged by Washington against them and their children. Washington has left those families behind for far too long. It's time for conservatives to remember those forgotten families, in word and in deed, in our hearts and in our agenda. If the conservative movement and the new majority in the 114th Congress truly want to be pro-growth and pro-opportunity, our agenda must first and foremost be pro-family. In every sense of the word, and not just on some issues, but on all of them. Everything we do in Congress ought to be informed by the struggles and opportunities, the challenges and aspirations of today's working American families. Take, for instance, our higher education policy. Our current system empowers colleges and universities to rather relentlessly raise tuition costs. It stifles the development of bachelor's degree alternatives, and it saddles parents and parents who are students with excessive debt. Right on cue, President Obama is calling for even more taxpayer investment in this failing system. This is ever the position of the left. Keep the status quo, no matter how broken it might be. Exactly the same. Just spend more money on it. But why should Americans settle for tinkering around the edges or spending more money on a fundamentally broken system? They deserve real reform that fixes the underlying system and makes higher education more available and more affordable to those who need it most. Non-traditional students who have been locked out of the current system, like working parents, deserve to be able to use federal student loans and grants to acquire the skills they need at a price that's right and on a schedule that works for them. Once we start looking at our nation's challenges through the lens of the family, solutions naturally start coming into focus. For example, we know that breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty depends on breaking the intergenerational cycle of fatherlessness. Here, family structure affects economic outcomes. But we also know that the causal arrow goes in the other direction, too. Many of the men retreating from marriage today are not doing so confidently. They're defiantly rejecting tradition. And they're not just in the abstract deciding that they want to defy tradition and embrace postmodern values. No, for many of them, their retreat from marriage is a constrained, insecure choice, driven by a basic lack of social and economic opportunity. So our pro-family, anti-poverty agenda must account for both sides of this coin. In addition to eliminating policy obstacles to family formation, we must build an economy that works for America's forgotten moms and dads, so that they're free to embrace, rather than subtly encouraged to retreat from, marriage. We need to repair our broken criminal justice system so that reformed offenders can return to the families and neighborhoods that need them. We must open up our transportation system so that we're investing in the infrastructure projects that benefit working parents, connecting where they want to live to where they need to work, rather than advancing the agenda of special interests and bureaucrats in Washington. And we must restore competitiveness and dynamism to the top of our economy by reining in a federal regulatory regime that stifles innovative, job-creating startups while coddling well-connected corporate incumbents. Conservatives often get criticized for putting too much emphasis on the family. But at this point, with a mountain of social science evidence behind us on our side, there's no denying that the critics have it exactly backwards. The real problem is that we don't think about the family enough, at least not in the right way. You see, it matters a great deal how we think about the family, how we discuss the family in public policy context. Too often, conservatives talk about the family in disjointed terms, as if it had two separate and distinct meanings. Because we understand its profound effect on character formation, most conservatives instinctively appreciate and celebrate the family as a moral institution, and therefore look at it solely from that standpoint. But rarely do we even acknowledge, much less embrace, the family as an economic institution. Sure, we talk a lot about quote-unquote working families, but this doesn't do justice to the contributions America's families make to the American economy. Many moms and dads are workers, yes, but we all know they're much, much more than that. So the challenge for conservatives, and progressives for that matter, is to embrace a new definition of the family that fuses and transcends these two meanings. We need to acknowledge that the family is both a moral institution with economic implications and an economic institution with moral implications. We can no longer afford to pretend as if the family were strictly a moral issue, while insisting that poverty, unemployment, and unequal opportunity are strictly economic issues. Ignoring the economic consequences of family structure isn't the polite, non-judgmental thing to do. It contradicts reality and distorts our public policy debates. and ignoring the way economic conditions influence families, how they're formed, and whether they remain intact, leaves us blind to the opportunities policymakers have to strengthen the family by strengthening its economic foundations. Family breakdown, especially within America's most vulnerable communities, is not for us to judge, but to try in every way we can to help repair. This work that remains ahead of us, must be done with great sensitivity and tremendous compassion. And we pray it must also be done with liberals. But it must be done. The American family is always changing, but our nation's dependence on the family never will. They are what make us good, and they're also what make us great. The heart of American exceptionalism is not bankers in a boardroom or politicians at a podium, but parents helping their kids with homework after dinner at the kitchen table. In the battle of ideas, it's easy to forget what we're really fighting for and for whom we're fighting. Washington too often forgets the family. We forget that economic growth and strong national defense are not ends in themselves, but the means to the happiness of the people. The real work of America is not the projection of power or the accumulation of wealth, but the humble heroism of story time, soccer games, and visits to grandmas. We must remember that the most audacious entrepreneurs in America are not the high-tech CEOs in Silicon Valley. They're a young couple at an altar saying, "I do." And the most important investments in our nation's future are not issued on Wall Street, but are sleeping in their mother's arms at the maternity unit of their local hospital. Building a new conservative agenda of reform around these moms and dads and kids, remembering America's forgotten families, is the path to restoring the greatness of our great nation. Thank you very much. May Almighty God continue to bless the United States.
The senator has time for one or two questions. Sir.
Don't be too kind to your adversaries. Accuse them of doing a lot of this on purpose. The whole ideological slant of the left is to destroy families, to destroy society as we know it, to destroy morals, to destroy the glue that holds everything together. So pin it on them, blame them for it, make them targets, because you have to have a villain. Otherwise, you don't have a narrative. They are the villain, and why hide it? It's like making excuses for Islam. Know your enemy and name him.
Yeah, I understand the point and the sentiment. Look, Washington is full of lots of different kinds of people. You may disagree with me on this, but I believe that most of them, including most who are at the absolute opposite end of the ideological spectrum from me, don't subjectively intend to hurt people. There may be people who are mistaken about what's going to hurt and what's going to help. But that's one reason why I tend to try to not vilify those on the other side of the aisle, is because I think, though mistaken, most of them at least have an outcome in mind that is positive, even if that outcome is unlikely to be reached. But the other reason why I tend not to take that approach is that this is not a problem created by only one political party. My political party has contributed to this, if nothing else by acquiescence, but also in many instances by affirmatively acting to put policies in place that have hurt families. So, yeah, I see the point, but I think where we can go with that is put even more emphasis on the fact that once we recognize that we have a system that is broken, as it relates to families. Those who will defend the broken status quo and cling to it like an old tattered security blanket are on notice and are resisting things that would help the American family and therefore help the American people.
Jerry, just wait for the mic.
Thank you for coming by, Senator. Given, I think, the common sense notion that what you're talking about is real and true about families and their importance, how much support for those ideas and how much support for the fact that there is a problem with how families are treated and supported? That problem is exacerbated by government policies. How much of a recognition do you find in Washington and in the Senate, and therefore how much sentiment do you believe there is for taking some action to fix it?
These things are difficult to quantify. I wish I could give you a mathematical formula or a numerical answer. I would describe it as small but growing. There's a small and growing level of awareness within Washington of the fact that this is happening. But it's growing rapidly because the social science evidence continues to mount. And the social science evidence is virtually unrefuted as far as I'm aware in terms of this discussion of the fact that the single biggest predictor, the single most impactful factor on upward mobility is the existence of a married parent household. And if you have that, that's the best gift that you can give to your children. And so with that as the sort of kernel of truth that lies at the center of what we're trying to do, as awareness of that continues to mount, I think we will see increasingly that so many policies emanating out of Washington are undermining that. When you look at the fact that, for example, we have the marriage tax penalty, a marriage tax penalty that has existed for years and that Congress actually made worse 2 years ago. The fact that we have, for a long time, had something in our tax code called the parent tax penalty, which I've discussed previously at the Heritage Foundation and which I could take another 15 minutes to discuss right now, but where we basically punish parents through our tax system. So from those tax-related policies all the way to something as mundane as the way we fund transportation infrastructure projects in this country. That, too, hurts American families. Because in making it more difficult to fund road construction and maintenance, we make it more difficult for people to find housing that's close to where they want to live and close to where they need to work. So all of these things put stresses and strains on families, some more directly than others. Now that the social science evidence is mounting, I think we as a Congress are more likely to become more aware of it, especially as we link up some of these public policy threats to the family, some of which are relatively obvious, like the marriage tax penalty. Some are less obvious, but understandable, like the parent tax penalty, and some of which take a couple of steps before you can fully comprehend them, like the transportation funding problem that I described.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate your leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move straight into a conversation on K through 12 education with Luke Messer.
Okay, great. We're excited for this conversation. We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about education. Congressman Luke Messer is Congressman from Indiana's 6th Congressional District. He was elected freshman class president when he came in, so his peers all look up to him, and he's a very well-respected guy in the group. He serves on the House Committees on Budget, Foreign Affairs, Education, and Workforce. He's a sixth-generation Hoosier, a national advocate for limited government, fiscal discipline, strong national defense, and traditional values. He's a three-legged stool conservative like we are here at Heritage. Yesterday, Senator Cruz called school choice the civil rights issue of our generation. Today, we're going to go deeper into our discussion about education reform. Congressman Messer is passionate about the issue. We're very proud to be working very closely with him on this issue. His staff is constantly on the phone with our staff and Lindsay and our team who've been really deep on this issue, and it's great. He's introduced a bill providing full Title I portability, which would allow states to make funding streams follow students to their school of choice. We are very proud to work with him on this and thank him for his leadership. Please welcome him to the stage.
Hi there. Thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, I'm Congressman Luke Messer, and I want to thank you for being here today to talk about the importance of equal opportunity and education for every American child, or as we commonly call it, school choice. I grew up in public schools, and I was raised in a single-parent home by my mother in rural Indiana. I had no chance of going to a private school when I was growing up, but I didn't need to. My mom worked 40 hours a week plus overtime at the Delta Faucet factory to put food on the table. I was blessed with great teachers and an active parent who cared about my future. But too many kids don't have that. They're locked in failing schools, falling behind, and frankly, losing faith in America. In fact, last year, only 64% of Americans surveyed said they still believe in the American dream. That means more than a third don't. And that's the lowest such result in nearly 2 decades. The question is why? Well, we've all seen the numbers. Paychecks are shrinking, the middle class is getting squeezed, folks are working harder, and their wages are stagnant. The cost of necessities like making dinner and going to the doctor just keep going up. As my good friend Jim Jordan, Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio often says, right now the middle class sees the rich getting bailed out, they see the poor getting a handout, and they feel like they're stuck in the middle paying for both. So who's advocating for working Americans? As a party, as a movement, as a cause? The answer to that question needs to be us. We have to champion solutions that help working families succeed. So once again, they feel in control of their own destiny and continue to believe in the American dream. That fundamental idea that your future will be determined by your ability and your integrity and your work ethic, not by your zip code. Now, this is heavy lifting, and I'm remembered of an old joke by Yakov Smirnoff. Many in this room would know that Yakov Smirnoff was a comedian of the 1980s. He was a Russian who came to America in the era of the Cold War, and he would always have sort of amazing insights about the difference between life in a Soviet world and life in America. And he told a story of going to a grocery store. He walked down one aisle and he'd see powdered iced tea, just add water and poof, you've got tea. And then go down another aisle and see powdered orange juice. You just add water and poof, you got orange juice. Go to a third aisle and see powdered milk. You just add water and poof, you got milk. Came to a fourth aisle and he saw baby powder and he said, "Oh, what a country," right? And the reality is some problems don't have just add water solutions. Some problems it takes a while to be able to solve. As Ronald Reagan used to say, there are no easy answers, but there are simple ones. And that's what's so exciting about school choice. It's not a silver bullet, but it does represent one of the simple ways to get working Americans back on track and to help poor in our communities climb out of poverty. American families don't want educational choices made artificially or from the top down by politicians and the education bureaucrats. They want those choices made naturally, organically, and from the bottom up by parents and teachers. When we embrace equal opportunity in education for every American, when we support school choice, we empower every American family. Now, I know some would suggest that a conservative agenda should start and end with abolishing the Department of Education. And frankly, as a conservative, I'm sympathetic to that idea. I've read the Constitution, and there's no mention of a federal Department of Education anywhere in there. Moreover, in the last 35 years, the amount of money we've spent on K-12 education at the federal level has increased by 400%. And frankly, we all know the outcomes are terrible. According to the latest PISA rankings, our kids perform below average in math, science, and reading when compared to students in 65 other countries and economies. So I get it. The old approach isn't working. But when we lead with an agenda that abolishes the Department of Education, we sound to parents like we don't care about their number one priority, their kids. That's why I love this issue. It puts us on the side of the American family and puts us on the side of America's kids and puts the Democrats in the position of defending an indefensible status quo, where the education bureaucracy decides what's best for every child. We need a different approach, an open school system where parents are put back in charge. Now, I'm not suggesting a federal Department of School Choice, but I am suggesting we move conservative education reform by crafting legislation at the federal level that empowers parents, pushes existing federal dollars back to the states, and incentivizes choice at the local level. I've seen firsthand the difference education reform can make for families and students in my home state of Indiana. As the then president of School Choice Indiana, I was in the middle of Indiana's school choice revolution in 2011. Back then, under the leadership of then Governor Mitch Daniels and a Republican-led state house, Indiana passed the most expansive school choice program in the country. Indiana has an all-of-the-above approach to educational opportunity. In addition to robust charter schools, public school choice, homeschool, and online learning programs, the Indiana Choice Scholarship Program gives voucher scholarships to students from middle and low-income families to attend the private school of their choice. The results have been nothing short of remarkable. In the first year of the program, 3,900 students enrolled. A little over 3 years later, the program now has almost 30,000 students. Based on those market trends alone, we're clearly meeting a need. I've seen rallies of thousands of parents and students at the Indiana State House, representing a mosaic of every color and race in our state, chanting support for this program. I've talked to parents and seen the tears in their eyes as they hug a teacher or a principal from their new school in appreciation of their new opportunity for their child. As a fringe benefit to educational choice, because many private schools are also religiously focused, thousands of students are getting a faith-based education their parents couldn't otherwise afford. My son Hudson has noticed a marked difference between the private Catholic school education he was getting in Indiana and the education that he's getting now. As he put it, Dad, at my new school, they only care about what I know. And what he meant is they're not teaching him about faith and values. So what does all of that mean for Washington? As we have in states across the country, it's time to plant a flag here. I'm intrigued by the number of presidential candidates who are embracing school choice and including equal educational opportunity in their platforms. But any policy measures we want to see enacted in 2017 or beyond have to start taking root now. This room knows that Ronald Reagan's tax agenda of the 1980s was shaped by Jack Kemp and others' supply-side economic policies debated through the 1970s. Those policies emphasized individual responsibility, reduced government spending, and a growth-oriented approach to taxes. We need to lay a similar groundwork now for a free market-based education system that emphasizes educational choice in all its forms. This new approach would empower families, reduce the influence of the top-down federal government bureaucracy, and produce better outcomes. It's been my privilege, as Tim mentioned, to work with Heritage and our prior speaker, Senator Mike Lee, to introduce the Enhancing Educational Opportunities for All Students Act. It's an opt-in program that gives every state the option, if they choose, to convert nearly $14.5 billion in existing annual federal education funds into scholarships that would follow students to the public or private school of their choice. Second, it expands the way parents can use 529 education savings accounts, allowing them to be used for pre-K through high school expenses, as well as for college expenses. Third, it gives parents the opportunity to use Coverdale education savings accounts for qualified homeschool education expenses. And finally, it eliminates contribution limits on these accounts so parents can maximize their use as a financial planning tool for their child's education. I also founded the Congressional School Choice Caucus to expand educational freedom, empower families, and promote policies that increase high-quality educational opportunities for every child. As chair of this caucus, I've had the opportunity to visit charter schools, private schools, and online learning centers across the country. One of the most impressive experiences I had was right here in Washington, D.C. at Basis Charter School. Basis teaches an elite advanced liberal arts curriculum utilizing Latin, algebra, and advanced science concepts in the 5th grade. The results of the school are off the charts. They're educating kids from every single zip code in the Washington, D.C. area. I participated in a question and answer session after these classes with the students, and they were smart, talked a lot about hard work, extra hours after class, and the challenges of their curriculum. They were proud of their opportunity. But their number one concern was how we could ensure that their friends, neighbors, and relatives had the same kind of opportunity. That's powerful. These kids recognize that the freedom to choose their learning environment has changed the trajectory of their life. And they want those same opportunities to be available for others. Thankfully, there are a number of solid pieces of legislation proposed this year that could help us do just that. In addition to the bill I just referenced, Senator Lamar Alexander has the Scholarship for Kids Act, which should be debated. This bill, which I've co-sponsored in the House, gives states the option to use $24 billion in federal education funds and turn that into scholarships that directly follow the child. If this bill became law, about 11 million students who are eligible for Title I funds could receive an average of $2,100 to use toward an education that best suits their needs. Senator Tim Scott's Choice Act seeks to expand educational choices for children with disabilities, those from military families, and kids from lower income families as well. But we need your help. We're having an event here in Washington, D.C. on January 28th during the National School Choice Week to celebrate the progress that's been made with the D.C. voucher and charter school programs and commit ourselves to a broader effort. I'd encourage you all to attend and listen to the House and Senate leaders that participate and encourage us too. Let the Democrats defend the old way. Let them defend the indefensible, the status quo that's failing too many families. We can be the champion of the American family. It's really this simple. In modern America, your destiny should not be determined by what family you were born into or what zip code you live in. This is the civil rights issue of our time. And it's a political issue we can win on. Let's be the party, the movement, the cause that fights for the American family and make sure that every American has a real chance to succeed. Friends, there are better days ahead. Better opportunities lay just beyond the horizon. If we stand on our principles, stand with the American family, and demand that parents have a choice so every kid has a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Messer. That was great. Congressman Messer is going to stick around for the panel, so we appreciate that. And now I'd like to invite the panel up and introduce Lindsay Burke, who's our Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Institute for Family, Community, and Opportunity here at the Heritage Foundation. And I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to introduce the rest of our panel and to lead a discussion. So thanks, Lindsay. Come on up.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks, Congressman Messer. That was fantastic. So as you outlined, the benefits of school choice are clear. Increased graduation rates, improvements in the public education system, better access to services for children with special needs, increased parental satisfaction and involvement in their child's education. You know, one of the most poignant quotes I've ever read about the benefits of school choice, believe it or not, came from the U.S. Department of Education. So, right, cue the laugh track. So, but they put out a congressionally mandated evaluation of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program back in 2010. And it was in that report that it was written, by the end of the second year of data collection, it became clear, very clear to us, the researchers, that the vast majority of families in the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program were moving from a marginal role as passive recipients of school assignments to active participants in the school selection process in very practical ways. This realization suggested that most Opportunity Scholarship Program parents were essentially moving from the margins to the center of their children's academic development. That really stuck with me, the power of school choice to move parents from the margins to the centers of their child's academic experience. So school choice is a win-win. But as Congressman Messer alluded to, Congress oversees a rather limited role in education, especially school choice. Congress is just a 10% shareholder in all education financing. 90% of everything that's spent on education is financed at the state and local level, and as such, and to maintain the tenets of federalism, school choice must largely happen at the state and local level. So the challenge for federal policymakers who rightly want to advance school choice is to do so in a way that is appropriate at the federal level, the types of reforms like those outlined by Congressman Messer, Title I portability, lifting the cap on Coverdell, allowing 529 accounts to be more flexible. So with that, I'll turn it over to our panelists. We have a great panel today. Cara Kerwin is the president of the Center for Education Reform, one of the nation's leading education advocacy organizations. And Don Seufer is executive vice president of the Lexington Institute, a nonpartisan think tank located in Arlington. Don also serves on the District of Columbia's Public Charter School Board. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you, Lindsay. And every time I hear Congressman Messer speak, I just get more and more charged because it's fabulous to have leadership back on Capitol Hill and someone who's really pushing this agenda forward. I mean, the first ever school choice caucus is just really incredible to me. And it reminded me to kind of look at the history of school choice, especially in Congress. When I first came to this movement, I was actually an intern working in the office of Senator Moynihan. I was from New York, and I only had two options. But Moynihan, I came across this letter. This is from 1997. It was Moynihan writing to then AFT President Sandy Feldman, basically defending his position to support school choice. And basically he said, it's a loss to modern American liberalism that conservatives get this, but liberals don't. So for over, 2.5 decades, conservatives have been on the right side of this issue. They understand that parents need freedom and choice. In fact, 72% of Americans really do believe in school choice, and those numbers fluctuate, every year, but it really remains pretty high. 86% of Americans agree that we need more accountability in our schools. Gosh, can you imagine anything that Americans can agree on at that level? But the main problem, and this goes to your point, Congressman Messer, is that, 2/3 of Americans really don't believe that their elected officials are leading on education issues the way they need them to be. And so when you look back at the history of school choice on Capitol Hill, you could see that it takes time, it takes courage, and it takes leadership to actually enact stuff and get stuff happening in states. 2 decades ago, you had congressmen fighting for vouchers here on Capitol Hill, and it got vetoed twice by President Clinton. We might have that same scenario play out in the next couple of years. But they stayed the course, and 10 years later, we have the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. Meanwhile, we saw Tommy Thompson partner up with a Democratic legislator from Milwaukee to pass the first ever voucher program in Wisconsin. Cleveland followed suit. Now, today, there are 19 programs operating across the country. If you have leadership on Capitol Hill, you can demonstrate and give courage to those state leaders at home, because yes, education truly is a state issue. But it really does take that courage and tenacity, and I'm thrilled to see that energy back on Capitol Hill.
Thanks. There's been a popular book in urban education for the past 5 years called Teach Like Your Hair's on Fire. I'd love to say that I'm here to advocate education policy like your hair's on fire, but I've seen it and it's not pretty. If Congressman Messer started by talking about the $14 billion that's appropriated for Title I. Title I is the largest piece of federal funding for education. It constitutes about 40%. Special education is behind it. If Title I were a charter school, it would be closed. If Title I were a principal, it would be fired. Teach like your hair is on fire. I have the opportunity to spend time at urban charter schools here in the District of Columbia that we're proud of. We have a long way to go, but we're recognized as the highest performing charter school sector in the country, and we're making progress. If you look at the progress that Title I which was instituted to help students who were disadvantaged and underserved. If you look at the progress that they've made, 7 points on NAEP over the last 10 years and not closing any of the achievement gaps that we see in 8th grade. There's some small progress in the 4th grade test, but on the 8th grade test, it disappears. And there have been negligible, if any, gains in reading and math in 8th grade. Teach like your hair is on fire. I've had the good opportunity to hear Congressman Messer articulate his vision for education, and sir, it's an honor to stand with you. And you are both a realist and a visionary, and that's what American schools need. If we look at what we can accomplish in education, if we look at what school choice can accomplish, if we look at Kip and Power in Los Angeles, a school of choice, the highest rated school in Los Angeles County, a charter school that uses blended learning. If you look at Carpe Diem Indianapolis, that had 3 years of growth in reading and 4 years of growth in math in its first year in an urban charter high school. These are blended learning models. We look at what can be accomplished in schools of choice. We look at where the charter school movement is headed. Basis is a wonderful school. If you look at, come and visit any of our Tier 1 charter schools here in the District of Columbia. We're very proud of them. And the number of charter schools and the number of DC kids who have seats in Tier 1 charter schools is growing. You can recognize them because they're the ones that advertise on the backs of buses that says Tier 1. We have a long way to go. We've closed a quarter of our portfolio of charter schools here in the District of Columbia in the 7 years that I've served on the board because they're low performing. No one celebrates failure, but it has to happen. The District of Columbia and the great state of Indiana are really leading the way on school choice in the United States in ways that we can all learn from and ways that all of our children can benefit from. And that's the sort of leadership that I'm incredibly grateful for from Mr. Messer and from this panel, and looking forward to building on that in the year to come.
Great. Well, we have a few minutes for questions, but I'd like to kick it off with just a few questions for each of you. And maybe starting on the end, Don, with you, since you just wrapped up, can you talk a little bit more about those charter impacts? There's been great work done by Carolyn Hawksby at Stanford, and you'll often hear folks go back and forth about the efficacy of charters and their impacts. Can you kind of flesh that out a little bit for us?
There are parts of the country that if people ask about charter schools, I'm not sure how I would respond. If you look at the national research, it can be mixed. Charter schools, in many of the studies, don't perform noticeably better nationally than other schools. But when you really drill down and you really see what constitutes a high-performing charter school movement, you need strong charter school laws, you need strong charter school authorizing practices, and ultimately you need to enforce quality in the charter school sector. We've done that here in the District of Columbia to great effect. We're driving education averages in the District of Columbia. We have a long way to go. 53% of black boys in 8th grade are below basic. We are in no position to be resting. But this is the sort of model for charter school authorizing that the nation can learn from. And if you look at New York City, if you look at the District of Columbia, you look at the incredible work that's happening in Indiana with the new statewide charter school authorizer and the mayor of Indianapolis, this is a way to get things done, and this is a way to produce happy customers and families and children who are realizing the opportunities that they can take advantage of.
And maybe both for Cara and Congressman Messer, could you talk a little bit about the parent component of this? Often, maybe not often, every now and then you hear folks who might question the ability of families to really navigate a robust choice system. What's been your experience, especially in Indiana on the ground? And
Well, my observation to the prior comment is, there's a level of accountability with charter schools that you don't have in the public school system. We close charter schools that aren't successful. There's very few public schools, if hardly any, that have ever been closed. I think one of the challenges we face is how do you then get models that are working up to scale? I mean, one of the real tragedies, probably most in this room have seen the movie Waiting for Superman, which is a movie, but it's about a very real-life phenomenon that we have scarcity of opportunities. And you see these families, some who would say, to your question, that you have families that maybe can't navigate it themselves. What you see in reality is that where parents have choices, they are highly engaged. And frankly, they know the difference between whether their kid's in a situation where they can succeed and other opportunities where they can. And when they can't get there, again, for those who've seen the movie, I mean, it's obviously tragic for them. So one of the things, again, would completely agree, the federal education dollar is, 10% of the total dollars we spend as a nation. But as a nation, how do we get these strong models up to scale so that we're able to eliminate that scarcity?
You know, I typically get offended, and we hear this quite often in our space, that parents, especially those parents, don't know how to make choices. And it's because we haven't empowered them, educated them, and allowed them to make those choices. And frankly, we haven't created the market. Look at Indiana. 3,000 students first participating in the program, 30,000 3 years later. Parents know how to choose. When the market's there, when provided with good information to make decisions about their schools, let's just be honest, most states and the data that's available to parents is almost impossible for people like us to understand. So how is a parent, especially a low-income parent, potentially working, 2 or 3 jobs and maybe a single parent, how are they going to maneuver all that information unless we help make it easier for them? That's where we at the policy level can help. But really, I mean, it shocks me. And I know, Don, you know from the DC experience that parents really do know how to make choices, but it's how we provide the choices for them, and it's also how the information is made available to them.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. We'd like to open it up. If you'll just wait for the mic to come around. Yes, sir, in the back there.
Thank you all for being here. What about the Department of Defense, the 1.5 million kids that are sent to public schools through Department of Defense budgets, and all the charter schools that don't allow them to even apply because they're not taxpayers in their local jurisdiction?
Well, it's actually not, and I've been looking at this, I'm sorry to jump in, but it's not necessarily that they're not allowing kids to enroll, it's because the restrictions at the district level or within the Department of Defense that are preventing it. There are, I think, 9 charter schools on bases right now, and more bases want that, but the status quo has prevented that from happening. And so our families who serve in the military should have access to choices, but they're being denied those because of people here in Washington or people back home that still want control over that space. So I would push a little harder to get more information on that, but there are charter schools serving those populations, but a lot of the reason is because they're being blocked. Those parents and military families are being blocked from having those options.
Being blocked locally or being blocked by the DOD?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And I would add, too, Senator Scott has a bill that would allow for a pilot voucher program on military installations.
Yeah, and we're working with Senator on that program, but on the way out, I'd love to chat with you about it, because if there's more we can do, we'll do it.
The DC Charter School Board has asked for legislative help to work with the open enrollment rules to give priority to military families so that we can serve them. If you look at the charter school on Bowling Andrews Air Force Base in Prince George County, I highly recommend visiting. It's an excellent example of what can be accomplished to serve this student population. That you're absolutely right. And Virginia is the state that has had the largest growing active duty military population as a result of the BRAC, and often it's the local school districts who are the last people to hear about the planning that they need to. So we need to do a lot better with that. Mm-hmm. But where we do get it right, I think there are shining examples that we can learn from.
So we're all sort of singing Kumbaya on this panel about school choice. Can we talk just for a second maybe about some of the blockers and the barriers to choice? I'm thinking about the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program here in the district. The administration hasn't been exactly favorable to this option over the years. So can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers to advancing choice and how to overcome those options?
Well, I've always said when I talk to young people, when you shoot for A's and you miss, you get B's. When you shoot for B's and you miss, you get C's. So you better shoot for A's, okay? What's it have to do with what you're describing? I mean, I think we can't get fixated on the barriers. We frankly have to put forward what we believe is the right policy, and you never know. I mean, who would have thought that welfare reform in the 1990s would have passed, and I think it helped that they had filibuster-proof majorities or veto-proof majorities, but Bill Clinton was then able to sign it. But yes, I mean, it's unlikely that the president would support most of the bills that I would put forward that would give parents more choices and opportunities, although they've hinted that in charter schools they would have a little bit of flexibility. I also believe that we have a challenge getting our own members up to speed on some of these issues. Frankly, in the states where you have programs, most of those members of Congress are then therefore familiar with the programs and more willing to sort of understand how consistent with our principles, values, and mission we could create these programs. Those that are from states that don't have as robust a charter or even any choice programs, they have a tendency to say, well, why would we have anything to say about that? So yes, the president's not likely to be there. I'm focused on trying to make sure our own team understands the ways that we can, consistent with our principles, move forward on this issue.
I find the challenges to be from both the outside and the inside. Don brought up, well, only some charters are doing well. A lot of that's because of the state policy and the state policies that have been put forth. I mean, there's a lot of charter laws, like Maryland. I mean, there are some successful schools that are being successful despite the odds, but truthfully, it's a law in name only. And when you have bad policy and when you are actually putting people in charge of overseeing and authorizing schools who are also in charge of our failing public school system, we're basically not going to get the same result. So the results sometimes can be argued that they're mixed because we don't really have a robust charter marketplace or choice marketplace in the way that exists here in the district. The other problem, I think, and an obstacle, again, it goes to the politics of it, but it's the lack of knowledge. You look at a state like Pennsylvania, for example, for years and years and years, they led with SB1. It was supposed to be this great voucher program, and the charter school bill was going to be improved. There was no leadership. And both sides of the aisle had no idea what they were talking about or debating. It takes people like Congressman Messer to take the time and go educate their colleagues in these chambers so that they understand the value, the efficacy of it, and then help spread the word. But it does take time and effort, and that's what we need out of our leadership. And I think there's an opportunity right now with this Congress to do just that.
Don, what about barriers to charter expansion in the district in particular? We're almost at 50% now of students, nearly half of kids in DC are enrolled in public charter schools. Are we there? Is it a tipping point?
I don't know if I could predict when we're going to get to more than 50% because the emphasis on this board has been on quality, and we've closed as many charter schools as we've opened, and we've made it harder so that you have to be a top-tier charter school to be able to expand and to take in new kids and open a new campus. So the emphasis has been on quality, and we're pleased with that. And despite that emphasis, the market share has continued to grow to the point where there's very little chance that the DC Public Schools teacher contract that allows for evaluating teacher quality and paying them based on that would have happened if we didn't have such a substantial market share. It was closer to 25% at the time. And we've also, I've talked about charter schools. I have not talked about the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. There's a lot we can do. That's an incredibly popular program for the families that are enjoying it and that can enjoy higher graduation rates as a result. And between the good people that run it, there's a lot that the Federal Department of Education, for one, could be doing to help expand the proven success of the program, and that we, frankly, as citizens of the city, can be doing to really give families the opportunity. Heritage was good enough to publish a report that David Mulhausen and I wrote a few years ago, talking about school safety, because when you talk to parents about why they choose the schools that they choose, school safety is very near the top or at the top just about all of the time. Where's the information about the safety of children's schools in the District of Columbia? It's not there. And when you do a FOIA request like we did and publish the results, they're probably not shocking to the people in this room that have seen data like that in the past. But for the parents that are attending the schools that have high incidences of violent police incidents in their schools over the course of a year, that's the sort of information parents need to be able to act.
Yes, sir. Just wait for that.
A little bit about the state Blaine amendments and whether structuring programs, speaking of barriers, structuring programs such as Arizona's ESA accounts can help overcome some of those barriers.
Right. So I take a stab at that, I guess, to start. But many states have Blaine amendments in place now, and these are amendments that effectively prohibit the expansion of private school choice in particular. And those amendments are getting in the way of some of the really innovative and I think most inspiring school choice programs that we've seen to date. States like Arizona that have really innovative education savings accounts in place. So Arizona was able to do it despite that, and in fact structuring their Ed Savings Account program in a way that ensured that in fact the funding was going to parents. Parents could then make a direct choice as to how they wanted to allocate every single one of the dollars that are in their account. So I think how we structure those programs are really important as well. But that's certainly something for states to think about as they move forward and considering how they would like to advance choices. What do they do about those Blaine amendments, compelled support clauses? I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well,
Cara,
sure.
or-
I mean, in a few states, I mean, you look at New York or others, and actually, Florida had a voucher program and it was challenged, and now, they just have this really robust tax credit program. But a lot of states are looking at, the potential of tax credits or ESAs as a solution to provide parents opportunities. The thing that's really phenomenal to me about the ESAs is you're really seeing parents be real consumers of their child's education in so many different ways. I mean, they've got debit cards. They've created like their own, consumer reporting sites. It's really cool. And so when anyone says that parents can't make choices, you just look at this evidence and say, wow, they really can, and they make smart ones. And so I think we'll see more states, and I'm hopeful that we'll see more states where there's a lot of buzz from state legislatures. But again, that's something that we can lead on from here in Washington by demonstrating that choice is important on Capitol Hill, and then also help carry that message back home in the states.
Yeah, and I would just add, that's one of the reasons why the legislation we're putting forward includes the language on expanding the use of 529 savings accounts, Coverdale accounts, and eliminate those caps. Why would we be penalizing any family that wants to set money aside and help their kids have a better educational opportunity?
And the cap's at $2,000 right now. It's pretty limited, so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much, Congressman Messer, Cara, Don, for your great remarks. Please join me in thanking our panelists.